Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening. And sorry that we've started our show a touch late today. We've had one or two Wi-Fi, or one of us has. We're not really sure who it is. I've had a fiddle around. John's had a fiddle around to his end, and we'll just see how we go. So apologies for that, guys. It is still saying to me that it's a little bit unstable. So we'll see how things pan out. So apologies for that. I hope that's not too annoying. Joined us today. This is the Twilight Show, and we're on Teachers Talk Radio. I have once again with me a guest, very knowledgeable, who's pitched throughout the next hour. And we've got John Bald back on. So how sort of day have you had today?
I've had a very pleasant day, actually. I've been doing a little bit of teaching, talking to people, and to be honest, I've been playing a little bit of golf this afternoon too. So.
Oh, lovely.
Not so bad.
Right, a little bit of golf. Maybe we can talk about later on. I don't know. I don't really play much golf myself. I sometimes have a bit of a go, but usually ends up with the air turning blue. It's a very frustrating game.
It is.
Like me. But we're not here to talk about golf. We are about SEND, and we are going to be thinking around that John, I know, is very passionate about, and topical at the moment in terms of needs, increasing needs. I believe expecting at some point a government white paper, which address some of the issues that we have in SEND. Some of them are funding issues. I know that at local authority level, there are quite a lot of problems at the moment. The HCPs, not something I know a lot about, but something a little bit of sort of homework and research into for the show today. Just think these issues. Now, when John and I were having a chat about this show, we sort of discussed along the lines of what's going wrong in SEND. So I think that's probably a good place to start, John. So just off, from the top of the show, what generally do you think is at the moment with SEND provision in schools?
Well, everybody knows that the system isn't working properly, and there are all sorts of reasons for it. Part of them, if we go back, and I will just go back to set the scene a little bit, because when I started in the 70s, SEND hadn't been invented. But we had a category called educationally subnormal. and we're well rid of it, because that expression is far too close to subhuman for content, for comfort. And getting rid of that, the Warnock Committee in the 70s came up with this idea of special educational needs. And the idea was that that was going to expand beyond the work. A lot of the work in the 70s was on reading. And I got involved in it because somebody, be honest, bunked off one of my lessons when I just started teaching. I found out that he couldn't read and that nobody was doing much about it, and I felt I had to. I still do. That's been the what started me in teaching as a serious thing, because I just couldn't accept anybody being unable to read, and I still can't if it's at all avoidable. So, but the Warnock Committee said, you know, more or less, if somebody is having a learning difficulty, write a statement of what it is, and write a plan, and deliver it. Now that sounds quite easy. But if you start doing that with everybody who's got a learning difficulty, as they did in one LEA, and from memory it was Cumbria, immediately you end up with a huge more work than an education authority can handle. Immediately, you end up with a sort of utopian thing. You know, here's a problem, find a solution. Well, that doesn't work, and that unfortunately is the sort of thing that's continued. And the ideology came in because we had, in 2010 to 15, we had a coalition government. It wasn't just a Conservative government. People might remember there was a coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And to be honest, I think they thought the Liberal Democrats had to be given something to do, so they gave them this. And then they thought, and again, that, well, if we don't put any extra funding into it, then nothing much will happen. And that's the problem. We have, first of all, a very idealistic situation where, you know, anybody from, say, 3 to 25 was going to have an education and healthcare plan. But there was going to be no provision, no money for it. And that is the huge problem. And schools also were expected to find the first, from memory, £6,000 of any additional provision from their own resources, which they hadn't got. So you had schools, particularly infant schools, who were very, very reluctant to have children assessed, even when they needed it, obviously needed it. Local authorities hadn't got any money. And the other sort of, and this is a conservative ideological thing, and I'm not actually making a party political point here at all, because all parties have made mistakes in this area. But the Conservatives would not let local authorities build their own special schools. It had to be done through academies. And then they impose a legal duty on everybody to enforce these healthcare plans. And a recent judgment actually directed a local authority to use the private sector. And the private sector hasn't got the capacity either. So people are getting charged a huge and unrealistic amount of money by private providers, some of whom are very good, some of whom are not. And they're obliged to use them, and are virtually bankrupting local authorities. That's why we have this crisis, because the local authorities weren't allowed to build their own schools. Okay. So it is a complete mess. And the children and the parents are suffering. Local authorities are deliberately breaking the law by not actually making provision for these, because they know that by the time a parent has taken them to a tribunal and possibly had a penalty imposed, the penalty is cheaper than making the provision. We've got an unholy mess. And I have great sympathy with everybody that's trying to make any sense of it. As I've said before, I work myself with SEND with anybody who's got a problem. I mean, I'm in the fortunate position. I used to think a boomer was just a noisy child, but I'm apparently a boomer, and I'm financially in a position to be able to work without charging, which I'm very, very happy to do. I'm very pleased to be able to do it. But the people who are asking for me, I mean, one of the pupils we might talk about a little later on that I'm teaching to read at the moment, before he met me, his parents had started the procedure of an educational healthcare plan, and they'd got it just after I started working with him. So he's now started work at a new school, and it's costing £50,000 a year, including transport costs. Now, £50,000 a year over 5 years is £250,000. And you cannot, we just don't have the funds to spend that kind of money. Local authorities are going bankrupt, or at risk of going bankrupt, because of this huge burden that's been placed on them, a legal burden, through, I think, a combination of utopianism and incompetence, which is an unfortunate combination, really. So that is, where we are. We have to add COVID into that mix, because COVID has multiplied the problems by goodness knows how much. Children have been left without normal social contact during lockdowns and things like that. They've been left without teaching. Those that most need teaching haven't got it, haven't had it, and it's going to take an awful long time to sort this out. And at least I'm pleased the government is going to sort it out. There's some good ideas. Units in schools are a good idea, because parents want their children educated in the same school as other children. Wherever possible, that is a very good idea. But it's got to be done properly. You can't have, the other big change in sense since I started is that when I was working, as reading was my main thing. It still is my most important thing. It is now behavior that is the most important and the most pressing thing, because if somebody can't read it, or even has an intellectual disability, you can provide for that without disrupting other people. If somebody has got a severe behavioral problem, that is much, much harder, because a teacher cannot give their full attention to one child and to a class. It's a dreadful situation. I sympathize with the teachers that are stuck in it at the moment. I really do.
I mean, like I said, the local authorities worry, and thank you for putting a bit of history on that, John, because there was a few I wasn't really aware of, sort of in terms of sort of political decisions and so on. But you've hit on a good point there with what you've just said. We'll be constantly told as classroom teachers that SEND is our job. Disagree with that at all. But as you've said, the issue then comes when people based on the provision of the school, and it is extremely difficult. It's not on a par with we talked about Ofsted last time we were on, did we, John? A couple of weeks ago. That video is available to watch if you to see. It was quite an interesting and quite sort of a frank debate. But the thing that struck me is something that's very difficult to do for so many different reasons. Because, I mean, training of staff, the difficulty of how to manage and strategies for those students when they're actually in lessons. It's easy to say that a teacher isn't catering to the needs of students, but actually to do that is a real challenge. I think it's always going to be something that schools are going to find difficult, because it is a hard, and because, as you say, the funding comes through the EHCP, or that the government might look at to change how that funding works. Schools and academies get a nominal amount for students, but for students with the EHCP, that's where the extra funding comes in. You've then got the parents, and I have to say that it must be so tough as a parent when you fight for that funding, and that goes on for a period of time. So there's so many facets to this issue with SEND in schools that I almost know where to start with it. But I mean, I found quite a few things that John, that maybe we can look at. But obviously reading is something that is starting to a little bit more. Transition between Key Stage 3 and 4 is something that's really interesting me. and we'll maybe talk about that later. But the reading, just on the reading, I mention this just because it's very relevant to issues that I have working in school, where there are students there is a lot of students who aren't necessarily very academic, and what I've more and more is that if I give them an assessment, first of all, I need to give them plenty of, they know when they're going to get it, which I suppose is fair. But my point is, I'm finding it common for students for this, I don't want to say we say low ability anymore, but students, low retaining students, sometimes just outright say, no, I'm not doing it, I don't want to do it. And they will, they'll freak, they'll go into a bit of a meltdown and they'll refuse to do it. And I think sometimes, I know for sure the reasons, but I think sometimes reading is the issue. I think literacy and difficulty reading leads to a very general of self, you feel you have a real low level of confidence if you know that material that the teacher's going to give you, the questions, the wording of the questions on exam papers aren't accessible for various reasons. So what do you, John? I feel that's becoming more of a problem. I know we come at this from different areas, very closely with the specific students who are struggling, might have more insight than me into what's going on. Do you feel like maybe at the heart of a lot of the problems that we're having in classroom?
Well, a head teacher who has a school with an enhanced autism unit told me recently that virtually all of the children who've got special educational needs also have a reading problem in addition to any other difficulty they have. And I can help with the reading problem. I can say how I do that really, really quite simply, because my work is based on a study not just of the phonics and the system of English, which a teacher needs to know if you're going to do this, but on brain research, where particularly a gentleman called Stanislas Dehaene, who is the head of brain research neuroimaging in France, has ways of assessing brain activity from infants onwards. And he sees, he's written a very good book called How We Learn. I reviewed it, and this is not pseudoscience, this is the real thing. And I'm pleased to say that Stanislas Dehaene sent me a very complimentary note on my review of his book, which I'd take to mean he thought I understood it. And it matters. And brain research scientists in this country, notably Sarah Jane Blakemore, Jutta Frith, both fellows of the Royal Society. It was one of them that recommended Dehaene to me, and the Nobel Prize winner Kandel, who wrote a book called In Search of Memory, have all written very, very clear accounts of their work, and are all keen on making sure that people understand it. Even I can understand it. I'm not pretending to be a scientist for a minute, but if I can, if a fellow of the Royal Society wants to kindly tell me, explain their work to me and discuss it with me, I'm very grateful, and I want to share that with colleagues. So what we're doing when we're learning is building neural networks. And people talk sometimes about long and short-term memory, but that's really a bit of a simplification, because as we're learning, and I can explain this to children, we've basically I explained to them that our brains work on electricity, and the brain cells, as the person who first actually drew them won the Nobel Prize in 1906 for doing this. His name is Spanish gentleman, Ramon y Cajal. James, the brain cells seem to be reaching out to each other. You can see the connections. And they're not unlike fingers. They call them dendrites, which is just another kind of fingers. There are lots of them. And as they make a tentative connection, electricity, specialist brain cells actually deposit electricity, deposit myelin, which insulates them and speeds the connection up. So whenever we're teaching anything, we're building these neural networks. And children can understand that. And they understand that with practice, they become stronger. And this is what's actually happening. It's an electrochemical process. Professor Stein at at Oxford University said, gave a talk at the Wellington Festival a while ago, and he estimated that the current in our brains about 1/10 of a volt going along these connections. So what we're doing is building connections, and the most common connections are the phonics. Most of the time, a letter indicates a sound. C, A, and T is most of the time going to give us a sound. One sound for each letter works most of the time, but it doesn't work all the time. And the child that I'm working with, one of the children, 12, he couldn't read at all because he was trying to sound out every word one letter at a time. So he was trying to sound out the one letter at a time, which doesn't work, so he couldn't read. I explained to him that, first of all, we had 26 letters, but we had about 500,000 words or more, probably more, depends how you count. So the letters couldn't do it. It just could not operate one at a time. They have to work together, and how they work. And why the, which is the most common work in the language, might be worth explaining why the is difficult, requires an adjustment in the way we think. Because it's down to William the Conqueror and his scribes. They didn't like anything Anglo-Saxon, and the Anglo-Saxons had a letter to represent the TH sound, which was called thorn, and it was like a P. It was like a stroke of a P with the loop halfway up. And that's called thorn. It's still used in Icelandic, actually. So they wanted an alternative using the Roman alphabet, and they came up with TH. Now, there's two ways of doing this. My way is to explain it like that, and then look at the TH as a group, and then we look at other words with TH. So that we are actually understanding is the old thing. If you teach the as a word that you don't have to understand but learn, that's the same as giving a man a fish, the old Oxfam thing. If you show them that this is the pattern, this is how it works. My pupil, instead of being stuck on there, he could read the, that, then, this, there, all these other words, thousands and thousands of words, which have got even 1,000 TH. So if you treat these variations as odd exceptions, you teach them one at a time, it's very difficult for the child to make a connection. You teach the principles behind it, then they can. And this child is 12. He couldn't read at all in February. This is the book they're reading at the moment. It's called Beasts from the Deep because he said he wanted to be a marine biologist. I thought, right, okay, you want to be a marine biologist? I'll see if I can help you. And because he was interested in this to start with, and it's a beautiful book. I mean, these illustrations of fish, and it's very, very cleverly done. As a non-fiction book for children, this is wonderful because you can see that he's starting off with relatively light colors. This is so you're starting with the light at the top, and you've got various, and you're getting right down to these really dark areas at the bottom. And he read this. I mean, this is one of the ones that he read to me last week, and it's just worth. This is the giant oarfish, and he read this paragraph. There's the giant oarfish. Again, a very attractive illustration. He read this to me without any mistakes, I may say. And this is from Complete Non-Reader in February. It's possible that superstitious sailors in the past might have mistaken the giant oarfish, with its long, serpentine silver body and staring eyes, for some sort of ferocious sea monster. In fact, these gentle giants are not dangerous to humans. They don't even have teeth. Instead, they feed using gill rakers, rows of them, bony extensions in their gills that filter tiny organisms from the water that they can eat. Now, that progress in a few months is totally astonishing.
100%.
And the reason for it, first of all, he's interested. We find books. His grandmother gave him this book, not me. So I'm very grateful to her. You build on their interests, and then you tell them a few simple maxims. First of all, that we use what the letters tell us, but we don't believe the letters tell us everything. because of various historical reasons, notably William the Conqueror and the French. Why do you spell table table? Table. You can hear it in the French. And the other thing is that if we were 1,000 years old, we'd have a few wrinkles. So you explain the wrinkles, you build neural networks, and then you practice. It's a bit like a music lesson. And it's free. And if anybody else is interested, get in touch and I'll very happily demonstrate or help with any pupils that you've got. But if I were in your position, Tony, you're a science teacher. And I actually, on one occasion, I had the pleasure and privilege of working for the Science Museum as a consultant on the labelling of an exhibition that they ran called the Launchpad exhibition, which is an interactive exhibition. And they asked me to help them with the labelling. And what I said was that if the exhibit itself was clear, and you didn't have to understand something outside it in order to understand what it was showing you, then it was quite easy to write a label that was clear. But if you took something for granted, like understanding, that's some sort of principle of equal forces or something like that, if you took that for granted, it was very hard to write the label in a way that somebody that didn't already know could understand. So, I can see why you would have pupils who would find an assessment in science difficult. And the way that this has to be sorted, and I've seen it done, actually, I've seen it done in a brilliant school called Gateway Primary Academy in London. They just built reading into everything they did in the junior school, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. So that, but into everything they did, they made the children read in order to learn. They didn't hammer it, but they made sure that a short paragraph was fully understood at all stages. And reading, if you do that, then you've got a fighting chance of making sure that anything else that you do, because the children with severe reading problems need bespoke teaching, no question. And it's not difficult. I have taught teaching assistants to do this. I run one of the first batch of DFE training courses for teaching assistants back in the 90s. I can show them how to do this in the morning. I've done it. And I'm very happy. If you've got children in your school that have got any kind of problem with reading, I'm very happy to help. But again, pro bono. I don't need to charge for what I do. And I still can't stand anybody not being able to read. But the thing is that you can't bypass understanding. And the government guidance and this business of words that are just presented as common exceptions or sight words does that. You've just been taught to build words from letters. Now here's some where you don't have to do it. What's the child to do? How are they going to understand that?
Okay, so that makes sense, John. So it's the phonics teaches you a method of decoding, but what it doesn't really do is allow you to make those neural connections between what you're seeing and what you're reading. And that does make a lot of sense. You're more inclined to read something that kind of makes a logical sense, aren't you? So there's another couple of things I want to mention though before we go on. And apologies, guys, for the we are having the Wi-Fi issues are ongoing. So if that is I apologize to everyone for that. If you're trying to listen and watch. AQA.
Me too.
AQA, the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers, combining insight with their expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. I've seen plenty throughout my career. As we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, the websites or research AQA, we work with experts. I'd also like to just mention Hachette Learning, this partnership with Hachette Learning. They're publishers of professional development books and resources that support teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of tools. And just before we move on, John, The Chalk and Talk podcast is a podcast that we'd recommend you if you enjoy tuning in and listening to education podcasts. This one, Anna Stokey, who hosts this one, an advocate for evidence-based math education for students of all ages. On her podcast, from effective teaching methods and how-to guides to tips for evaluating with teams. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers, and policymakers, and impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so talking then about assessments and reading. We listened to Radio 4 this morning, and there was a lady on there talking about her dyslexia. And there was a couple of interesting.
Tony, actually, I don't know if it's which end. It could be mine and could be yours, but I'm just let me know. Some of the time I'm not hearing clearly.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, it's not. I don't know what's. I might just have to have a word with my Wi-Fi company if it's me. But like I said, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
It's coming and going, so it's back and forth. It's an unstable connection, I think, at the moment. So we'll persist with it for a little bit longer. We'll see how we go. Need me to I don't know if you can hear me. Can you still hear me, John?
I can hear you. It's just occasionally I'm getting gaps. Can you hear me?
Yeah, again, it's a little bit jumped. Yeah, it's in and out a little bit. So we'll press on for a little bit longer. If things get a lot worse, then it might be that we postpone.
Yes, I'm happy to reschedule this, and also if anybody gets in touch with me for any kind of problem with reading and basic maths, because dyscalculia, real severe difficulty with maths, is something that these pupils had as well, and I can work on that, particularly the thing on like multiplication tables. But neither this person nor their sister knew the 2 times table. Oh, okay. And one's 9 and one's 12. Now, again, by building up networks, not overloading and teaching maybe just half a table at a time sometimes. Good start. Don't do too much at once. Think about it. You're actually helping a child to build networks in their brain, whatever you're teaching. And if those networks aren't in place, you can't just jump past them. You can't start building a house halfway up. That's why actually there's a slogan, keeping up, not catching up. And that's a bit of a slogan. And I don't like it, because I do want children to participate, but not if you're doing so much for them that they can't do it for themselves when you take away the support. I think the whole issue of this, if we're going to actually tackle these problems rather than live with them, it's not support, it's teaching that matters.
From that initial stage, yeah, like you say, it's very difficult once you get to the level and the ages of students that I teach. But one of the, I don't know how well you can hear me now, John, but one of the things I was mentioned on this morning that I thought was interesting, there's a couple of things that she said that were interesting, but one are how we assess, and this made me really think. Obviously, when you're assessing students, you're never going to get away from the fact that there's going to be some reading required, some writing. But we very much moved away in some subjects from practical assessments. We lost practical assessments from science, for example. And I do find that with students that have SEND, and the practical side is something that really interests them, and often that they are very good at. So I sometimes think that's a bit of a shame. And when you look at the numbers of exam papers that students are now sitting, I don't know whether anyone's looking at the number of papers that they do at GCSE.
Far too many. There couldn't be more than 2 papers for any subject.
Well, exactly. And this is making me think there probably is another way. And what this lady said that kind of stuck with me was that she said education is like an oil tanker, plows on, it has this enormous momentum, so it's actually difficult to actually try and get it to slow down, to listen to ways of doing things. And that's not necessarily because people don't want, but in the day to day, yeah, it's very difficult. But that kind of this analogy of an oil tanker just ploughing on, unable to easily change its direction, its course. So that was quite an interesting one. So can you say, what is your feelings, John? Do you want to press on a little bit more, or?
Look, I'm very happy to press on. I'm very happy to, and if people have they got some way of getting in touch to tell you if they're hearing things clearly, that's great. If they're not, but to say I agree with you completely regarding assessment. The real problem with this is a lot of the people I work with have problems with assessment, and I'm pleased. The only way that you can do it is to prepare them for it. It's very unfortunate that when a lot of exams at GCSE, particularly before 2010, were assessed in coursework, the cheating that was going on was an outrage. I had a family member, and my family member has SEND, no question about that. He had severe reading difficulties, or not severe reading difficulties. Once I asked him, I said to him, would you like some help? And he said yes. I was really pleased because I didn't know if he was going to say yes because of all the trouble that he'd been having. He had his teacher in tears every night. It's not acceptable. But when it came to his secondary school, his coursework was fraudulent. The teacher, and I'm sorry to say this, but I could have identified the school, but my contact was someone working there and he'd have lost his job. He actually did the coursework himself by giving them a lot of things to download directly into a pre-prepared template. They just did the download. They weren't allowed to change it because they might mess it up. And he submitted 30 lots of identical coursework in the course, and the exam board didn't pick it up. Wow. So it's very unfortunate that more flexible means of assessment have been corrupted by teachers doing the assessment. And and sometimes under unfair pressure from heads. I'm not hiding away from that. I know somebody else, and this from a top public school. I won't name it. In one of the top public school groups, the teacher in this particular subject didn't believe in coursework, so he did it. And he did it in such a way, the head of the department did it in such a way that you couldn't tell, it wasn't as if he was going to get his whole class an A star or an A. They was the top grade at that time, it was a little while ago. So they would get B's and C's, and that was a good result. And his results were very good, no question. But the parent that I knew decided that she didn't want her offspring to get a B or a C, so they did it themselves and made sure they got an A.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Now that is just not on. It's not a way. But so what we've got to do is, first of all, design exams that are user-friendly, that do not complicate the matter they're trying to assess by extraneous questions. They do not use trick questions, which as a linguist, I do modern languages as well as literacy, as a linguist infuriate me. That you get a passage and say a passage of French or German, and you get questions and they're straightforward at the beginning, and then they put a trick question in the end that actually contradicts a lot of what you've already been going. And unless you're looking out for this trick, you'd lose marks. That's just stupid. And then grades given according to formulae that somebody's worked out, rather than the quality of the work the students. It's a very difficult situation. But there is one thing: we read for different purposes in different subjects, in maths and science, history, and we need to teach children to adapt their reading skills to these things, which means they've got to be reading in them to start with. Some schools do little glossaries, or I think, what do they call them? Knowledge organizers and things like that. I don't know if you've seen these. I don't know how effective they are, but at least you've got something you can practice. If you go into an exam, let's take 2 exams I took, O levels. French. My goodness me, did I like French? I lived French. Every time I thought of saying something in English, I worked out how I might say it in French. I went to French in my head all the time. It's a good thing to do that, actually, if you're learning a language. So when it came to doing a French exam, I was totally pumped up because I was going to do well. Didn't know how well, but I was going to do well. I wasn't bothered about it. Chemistry, oh dearie me, I did not understand it. I think I was taught the wrong syllabus, actually, because even though I'd revised it, I didn't understand most of the questions, and that was the only O level I failed. So if you're actually yes, I did fail it. I was very upset, and I'm of a fairly anxious temperament myself, and it took the shine off any that I happened to pass, actually. So because this is one of the reasons that I've been told that I'm successful with children who are anxious about their schoolwork, because I was myself. When I couldn't understand something, it started with handwriting in an infant school in Glasgow in the early 50s. And I'm a bit clumsy. I now know from working with an inspector from the Inner London Education Authority, a music inspector, I now know that boys' skills, their motor skills, the kind of things that we use in handwriting, tend to develop more slowly in boys than they do in girls. And in most primary schools, if you look at the handwriting of a class, it's more likely that most of the neat writing is going to be from girls, and most of the problems are going to be with boys. And it's partly that the work is not matched. The teachers don't take account of that, and they just think, oh well, boys aren't so good. But then, strangely enough, with musicians, and this person knew the motor skills through musicians. A lot of professional musicians are men and women. By the time they're 16, these things have evened out, but they've got different patterns of development. And I think this happens right the way through. So I was very anxious over that, and I didn't understand geometry. I was very anxious over that a while. I used to get migraines. I don't recommend it. Have you ever had migraine?
Yeah, from time to time. Yeah.
Not nice, is it?
Yeah, not particularly pleasant. With me, it's because I'm not wearing my glasses when I should be. Honest.
That can be a visual trigger, yeah.
I mean, if I put them on, I just get a reflection.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
So,
I can see a reflection on mine at the moment, actually.
But now I mention that, actually, I don't know whether sometimes that's a bit of an issue with students who will say to me, "Sir, I can't see the board," and I'll say, "Aren't you meant to be wearing glasses?" And they're broken, or yes, but I don't want to wear them, or I don't like them.
Yeah, that is a big issue in all seriousness, because did you know, as a scientist, you probably do know this, but a lot of people don't, that a fluorescent light that most of the schools use, it switches itself on or off and on 100 times a second. Because some colleagues watching this might not know this. I had to be told by Professor Arnold Wilkins, who's done a lot of work in this area, formerly of the Medical Research Council's Applied Psychology Unit in Cambridge, and another scientist who has got a lot to contribute to us. Under normal fluorescent lighting, there is a blue coating. What happens is that alternating current alternates 50 times a second. It sparks twice on each one, so you've got 100 sparks a second. On an ordinary fluorescent light, you've got a blue coating inside the tube that retains some of the light between flashes, or most of the red end of the spectrum. But some flicker on the blue light. You can usually only see it when something goes wrong with the tube. And if in supermarkets and some other public areas, they use a thing called the direct discharge light that doesn't have the coating. So some people get severe discomfort in supermarkets. They're sitting they're walking around under a battery of flashlights going off at 100 times a second at full blast. Most of us don't notice it most of the time, but some people If somebody says they can't see the board and you know that they're not messing you about, that needs to be investigated. And if they're not wearing their glasses, they can't do their work. And that needs to be investigated, and counselling. And, you know, it's something that needs to be built into every school SEND assessment system. And there are some very good, I'll give you another real example of this. A child of 6 in school wouldn't look at his books in an infant school. That happened to be quite near where I live. And the parent asked me for some advice. And I got some books, and just in an ordinary, this is just ordinary lighting I've got here. And he told me that, you know, he was getting headaches and the rest of this. So I tried to see if he was sensitive to light. The Institute of Optometry actually have a screening kit, which I use, which lets you try a number of tints to see if the person finds them more comfortable. It costs nothing to use it. And I do the same thing now by altering the background on a Word document. You can try any shade you like. Is it more comfortable? If it's more comfortable with a shaded background, I use that. But this particular case was interesting because he did find it a lot more comfortable to use a tint. And a little charity that I run called A Book of My Own paid for him to have a further assessment. Strange enough, Specsavers, actually, I'll give them the credit. They were the ones that were offering the service, and they were offering it at a reasonable cost. It cost £175, and other people would be offering something at 4 or 5 times that. And they took, they had a further assessment, and they sent him straight to Addenbrooke's Hospital because he had something that needed to be further investigated professionally. Now, if I hadn't done that little screening with him in the first place and then sent him to a specialist optometrist and then to Addenbrooke's, nobody would have discovered that young man had something called hydrocephalus, i.e. water on the brain, which needed professional teaching. And if it hadn't been screened, he wouldn't have got it. So he would have gone right the way through because the infant school didn't want to do an assessment, because they would have had to pay the cost of any extra treatment up to £6,000, which they hadn't got, so they just didn't assess. The junior school didn't. I mean, it just happened that little charity that I ran, which was just, I think back in the day, it was a long time ago. I had a friend who used to, was a history teacher, actually a brilliant history teacher, and he used to give talks, and he would donate his fees to this to do that. You know, if the schools didn't know that this could be an issue, the children were under fluorescent light all day, and some weak readers are sensitive to that. And if someone's getting a headache and can't look at a thing because of fluorescent light or getting migraines, the thing you need to do is to put them by a window or give them some sort of natural light and cut out the fluorescent and see if that helps. Again, you know, it doesn't help everybody, and it's been commercialized and overstated, but nevertheless, even adults, I mean, one of the person, if I tell you that a lecturer at Cambridge University, when I was presenting this as part of a seminar, said that she had severe difficulties in the library under fluorescent lighting and who benefited from it. Or a teacher who found it very difficult to read stories to her class under the fluorescent lighting because she found words moving about. And also a science inspector when I worked for Essex, who also had suffered from this for all his life. You need to be specific. If you ask for assessment, actually generally on SEND, the one thing you need to do is to think about the person in front of you or the person sitting beside you. What do they need? What is it specifically that they find difficult? Yeah. And that, once you ask yourself, 2 questions that I use all the time. I ask them myself, and I suggest other people do. What is it in this person's thinking that's preventing them from doing what they're trying to do?
100%.
How do I help them to adjust their thinking so that they can do it? And that business of adjustment of thinking, I actually stumbled across this a long time ago. Stumbled across this when I was trying to teach somebody French who'd got 9% in his mock and he wasn't allowed to do his O-level. I thought, how do you adjust your thinking if you're moving from English to French? And I based all my teaching of languages on that. and it worked. Again, remarkable progress. Got him in February. I didn't really want to teach him French. I was a reading teacher, but I did teach him French, and on that basis, he got a B after 3 months in his O level from 9%. Why? Because what I'd managed to do, and what we all need to do if we're going to help children with SEND, is to get behind the thinking, get behind the problem to the thinking that caused it, think it through and think, how do I help this person to change so that they can succeed? That is the key. And as a class teacher, and I have been a class teacher, I do teach classes, languages from time to time. It's so much harder to do that for each individual at the same time as you're planning something that's going to let most of the pupils to succeed. And we need much more flexibility in the way we group pupils if we're going to succeed in that. I mean, I've taught people for Oxford entrance or Cambridge entrance, and I've taught people with very severe reading difficulties. I can do both. The principle is the same. You apply that. How do we enable this person to adjust their thinking to succeed? What I can't do is do them both at once. And if you've got children who can't read at all in a mainstream class and you give them something to do and they can't do it, as you said, they will refuse sometimes. And and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, back in the day, when I was in Glasgow, they had these ferocious Lochgelly Tors belts that they would whack you with, and quite hard. Sir Alex Ferguson, actually, strangely enough, he got into so many fights at school that when his teacher retired, she actually presented him with this belt because he had more use of it than anybody else, which is not always as funny as that. That sounds funny, but it's not funny if you're belting children into submission, which is what used to happen. Now, you can't do that. And some of the children who won't go to school, and again, I've worked with some families in that position. My own family, my own extended family has been in that position. You can't force them, and finding their parents as if their parents are neglecting them, when in fact, you know, the only way to get some of these children into school would be to put them in a straitjacket and dump them. And even then, you can't get them to do anything. It's a dreadful system.
Yeah, it's a worry, isn't it? I mean, it like you said, it's very difficult. I mean, even level of diagnosis before you even consider what you're going to put in place or something. You say, I mean, I'm thinking of a student who I teach now, and I've got to be honest, I don't know why he behaves as he does. There's probably a myriad of reasons. Make him do any written work at the moment. The only thing I can make him do is engage him in a conversation.
Won't do any written work.
No, pretty much no. I'll do a tiny little bit at the start of every lesson. What I will do is I'll usually have quite a simple task for the lesson off. So it will be like 5 statements that are true or false, for example. Possibly do that bit where he's just got to write true or false as his answer, but he's completely avoids the work. And I think there's probably more issue, but I find when a student repeatedly everything to avoid writing, to me there must be something that we've missed. I don't believe he is officially under any SEND. He doesn't have a particular diagnosis, I don't believe, and there has been issues for a long time just behaviourally. So I don't know in terms of the chicken and the egg first sometimes whether the behaviour means you end up behind so that you
yes. Look, here's my proposition for you, Tony. Ask this young man, how old is he? 14, 15?
Yeah, 15. So yeah.
Ask him if he'd like some help. And if he says yes, I will try to help. If he sort of says no, then I can't. But here's one very, very, very good idea that I saw in a secondary school on inspection a long time ago. It was a long time ago. These students were doing one subject fewer at GCSE than the rest of the school. And on the time allocated for that subject, they had individual help with any aspect of their schoolwork that they wanted. And so they could go over with teachers. They could go over it and try and see if they could help. Now, that really helped, because one of the problems we've got, frankly, and not just for pupils with SEND, we've got ludicrously overloaded GCSE content syllabuses. Absolutely ludicrous.
Absolutely.
And you know this better than I do. Just getting through it. Well, getting through it doesn't mean that the children understand it, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. Then there's the fight for curriculum time, like you say, everything in, and we don't. And it goes back. Sorry, it goes back to the oil tanker analogy, which I really like. That we're ploughing on as teachers. We've got to get through content. The pressure seems to be on to get through content, particularly in science.
Oh yes.
Probably
the 3 sciences, when doing one properly, would be of much greater benefit to the children. There's this attitude among a lot of government ministers from both parties, because David Blunkett was just as bad as Michael Gove on a bad day. Just do more. And do more is no use if you don't understand what you're doing. I know you support Norwich City, Tony. And I went to university in Norwich, and so I have a soft spot for the Canaries as well. Actually, they've got too many soft spots themselves sometimes, but never mind. Back in the great days of Ken Foggo and Kevin Keelan and all the rest of Duncan Forbes. The question is, whereabouts is your school? Which part of the country?
I'm in Essex.
You're in Essex?
Yeah, South Essex.
South Essex. Right. I live in Essex as well. I'm very happy to come and visit and see if I can help any of your pupils. If they would like, it's very kind. And I mean, I have the usual DBS certificate. I did used to run a Reading and Language Development Centre for Essex Education Department in my time, based in Clacton and in Southeast Essex as well. And so I'm very happy to come and see if I can help him, if he would like some help. I mean, there was a child, again in Southeast Essex. I won't be more precise than that because I don't want to fingerprint the school or anything. We'll call him Simon, because that's not his name. Simon couldn't read. I was trying to teach him to read over Zoom with a TA present, because I always have another adult present. That's an Ofsted requirement anyway for when you were inspecting, and I still observe that. And the idea is not actually a child protection or safeguarding idea. The idea is so that the other people can see what I'm doing and see if they can help with it, and they know things I don't. Now, Simon, when I met him, was extremely attentive and worked hard at the very earliest stages of learning to read, because the phonics stuff does establish neural networks. The cat, catastrophe, catamaran, that does establish neural networks. What we need to do is to extend them for the irregular patterns as well, incidentally. That's it. So anyway, he is working with me. And then I don't see him for 3 weeks. Then he comes back and it turns up, and then we do a little bit. And of course, because he hasn't done anything for 3 weeks, I have to start again, more or less. But he is really attentive. And then in the rest of the school time, he's not. He's getting into fights. He's getting suspended. He is told he's useless and failing. I'm afraid that's it. You know, he knows that what he's going to fail at. And if you know that you're going to fail at something and you're doing it all day long and you're criticized for failing, you're in the opposite cycle from the one that we want for pupils. The pupil on the virtuous cycle works hard, succeeds, is praised, likes being praised, wants to do more, and you get a virtuous spiral going upwards, and the opposite going downwards. And Simon, frankly, is a sitting duck for one of these drugs lines gangs, because he's out of school. His parents neither help nor hinder what the school does. And for fairness, they don't hinder, but they don't help. And we've got children in that situation because the social and the intellectual, the mental development can't be separated. But you've got to give the children what they can do. And if they come unable to read, you've got to teach them to read. And what you need is flexible ability grouping that lets you do that. I mean, I can remember one quite famous English teacher, again, no names because he wouldn't be unique anyway, who said on BBC, on a television program that he was doing, that if a child came into my class unable to read, he went out unable to read. What use is that to anybody? And I challenged him on this, and he said, well, they told me to say that.
Okay.
Well, if you do what people tell you to say, what people tell you to say, you shouldn't be on television, should you? You shouldn't have been doing this. You've got to be honest.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, but
changes?
Science teaching is particularly difficult. I was sent when I was working in Essex by an inspector to a school in Southeast Essex, which was in a difficult area, because he said there was a science teacher there who was doing good work in a traditional kind of approach to science, and he thought I should see it. So I went down and in the afternoon, and I'm sorry to say that the teacher could not keep the children in the classroom.
Wow.
And I have seen this. I saw this again. HMI found the same in Greenwich in an inspection of science around the same time. And I have the greatest, first of all, the greatest respect for teachers. I am a teacher. I'm unusual as an inspector because I'm primarily a teacher, not a manager. I respect management. We need to have management to run schools properly. Well, I'm basically interested in how children learn, and I'm a teacher. As I was, saying last week, or last time we were on. So, if you go into a secondary school with a problem, the priority should be to organize teaching flexibly so that your problem is dealt with. I know one school that's doing this at the moment. I'm working with them in the Northwest. They have trained teaching assistants. They're training the teaching assistants themselves. They have a particularly brilliant counselor who has actually got qualifications in that. She started teaching English as an additional language. But the school has actually accepted the problem with these children on entry and reorganized its curriculum at Key Stage 3 to deal with it. And you can't sort of start unless you know where the children are. And match your teaching to where they are. And if you know they've got a reading difficulty, well, build reading teaching into what you do. Short passages, things that they're interested in, books. The lad who was reading this, and he wants to be a marine biologist, he's got every chance of doing it. Didn't know the 2 times table. We'll come back to that perhaps. Sister 9 couldn't read either, and sister was well, she couldn't read. That's to say that she would make a sort of commentary with reference to the text, and she was reading a comic book whose title was so. But somebody has said, "Oh, I've got this." So we got this, Greta and the Giants. I'm not necessarily a fan of Greta, but what I'm interested in doesn't matter at all. I'll go with what the children want. And so what did she manage to read yesterday? Using the same thing. Whenever you come to something that's not what's expected, unpack, explain, and practice. And this is a fairly typical kind of thing that I use. This is an introduction to the way that the spelling, that the English spelling system operates. It's analysed so that most of the time we get sounds, then we get letters give us information about another letter. So hat becomes hate if you add an e, or e, a c softened with an e after it. So you've got centre, city, cycle, that sort of thing. E, I, and y. Basically, sounds, information, groups, and history are what we get from letters. That's how it operates. Explain this, then practice. So she read this to me yesterday. One morning, things weren't quite as they should be. Greta stepped out into her garden, and there, huddled together in the shadows of the trees, were all the animals of the forest. Now she's 9, she's not 5. If she were 5, I'd be going through and doing these. So we've got to have the variations taught carefully and unpacked, and she could read that. But whenever you've got a new pattern that comes in, I mean, the word silvery actually came in the next page of this book. But you see that to start with, that at least is a sensible sentence for her to read and interesting. A soft silvery brown wolf stepped forward with his tail low to the ground. Please help us, he whispered. The forest is broken and we don't know where to go. The giants are ruining our home. Now, silvery is not an easy word for a child with a reading difficulty. So I started with silver, shiver, or something like that. I'll probably call the thing up on the internet because I can't remember the words I used. But you don't teach the word that they've got wrong. You teach another one with the same pattern. And then you for it. And by not teaching that word, you've got behind the thinking. You're actually giving them the means to read the word. And after you've done this a few times, what I usually do, and I get a look saying this, what do you give me this for? It's too easy. I'll throw in the word they got wrong and they usually get it right. And then you can go back and proceed. It's a bit like a music lesson. And again, I'm happy to demonstrate this. I've got some of it on, some of it recorded. The boy's father is, the children's father is very cooperative here. And I was delighted. So I phoned him up just before we came on, after I'd finished my afternoon exercise, and said, would you like a lesson this afternoon? I said, if it's not convenient, I'll do it tomorrow. No, it's just that we're at the library, he said. I thought, oh, wonderful. Enjoy the books and I'll see you tomorrow. Because they want to learn, they want to do it. And the boy who wants to be the marine biologist said to me yesterday, he said, now I understand why people enjoy reading.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, wow. I was utterly delighted with that.
Yeah, I bet. That's just what we want to hear, isn't it?
Yeah. But the other thing is, as I say, I'm very happy to run a seminar on this for teaching assistants if they want, because a very experienced person whom I respect a lot said what you do is just not replicable. It's not scalable, but it is. I mean, I posted on the X channel, I posted a note from a teacher who said, my teaching assistant's been using this now and it works. Of course it works, because it's consistent with the way the alphabet works and the way that what the brain research tells us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the research, led makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
I'm glad it makes sense, Tony, because if it makes sense genuinely, if it makes sense to you, then I'm happy, because it as one teacher to another, we've got to get it perfectly clear. It's got to make sense. I'm not spouting theory at people. I'm not using Greek. I'm not using words like phoneme and grapheme and fronted adverbial and goodness knows what else. The language is there. It can be discussed in plain English so that we can all understand it. And if it were, then we would all be better off, I think.
Yeah, we definitely would. I've just got to mention before sum up, John, about AQA again. Are obviously an exam board that I've done quite a bit of work with during my they know teachers are the real experts in the classroom, which is why they work closely with teachers, combining their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, different. So the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, and new school year, they're focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about teachers like you, just head over to their website or search AQA. We work with. And finally, just a quick mention again on Hachette Learning. I can just put that one up on the screen, actually. So this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources, support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and www.hashletlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. Okay, so that's that. I'll try and get that off the screen if it works. There we go. So, guys, I'm really, really grateful to people who have listened in. I'm very grateful to John for giving up his time again. I don't know if we've really even scratched of the stuff we've said, but a lot of what you said there really sort of resonates, I have to say, John. You can wonder at what point things start to go wrong for students.
Yeah.
I suppose it's from quite an early stage, isn't it? By the time they get to me, it does very much. Well, not that it's too late. I certainly don't want to say that, but they certainly bespoke and targeted support once they get to the level. And as we've said, all of these things get in the way. The need to get through curriculum, and depending on which school it is, the way that lessons are structured, the lesson is something that became a very popular thing. The oil tanker. I'm gonna be thinking about anchor of education over the next few days, because that's one's really resonant.
Thank you. Can I say, just more I think about this, and I'm not talking about streaming here at all, I'm talking about flexibility. If Key Stage 3 were reorganized somewhat so that children who needed this kind of help could have some kind of change to their curriculum, so that for some of the time they were getting teachers who actually understood how to get to the basis of what was causing them a problem and help them, whether in units or whether by reorganizing some of the English department or maths department. There's no research, for example, on teaching multiplication tables. Can't find any. And I've looked hard. There are, strangely enough, they get stuff on number sets, yes, but not on ways of learning tables, which is specifically what the children need to do. I've written some papers myself on the basis of what I've done, but I'm just an individual like any other. We need a systematic approach, but I think introducing a degree of flexibility on key skills in Key Stage 3 would help, and I'd be very happy to help. Again, what I do now is pro bono free, and I don't even need to claim traveling expenses either. So if anybody wants help, find a way of getting in touch. Get in touch with Tony. He can contact me. My website provider has gone out of business, actually. TypePad. They were very good, but I've had to try and salvage all the material. I've got to reorganize that. But yeah, I just I want to help, and I can help. So get in touch if you think I can help.
Well, that's very kind of you, John, and I'm many people at all around who would be happy to do that. And obviously impressed with the level of passion that you have when you talk about these things, and it's really good that you would do that. And there may well be some students who I think maybe you could help, who I work with. But what you say about the Key Stage 2 into Key Stage 3 transition, I said that I'm quite interested in. We're running a bit out of time, so we probably can't do
okay. Absolutely understand that, and thanks everybody for your patience.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in and out. It's been a little bit like my brain this afternoon. It's been one of those days today.
Yeah,
it's been a bit. I'm feeling quite tired this evening with
what's happened today. You know when you've done a day's work and do something else after it, don't you?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, yeah. Thanks so much for coming on again, John. It's really good to have you on. A little bit of a chat in a minute after the show, if you like. But we have run out of time, guys. Show's on this evening, actually. I know that Tom Rogers is on 7, and Bijesh and Claire are on also. And that one is on Podbean show. Probably it's quite an interesting one coming up from Tom Rogers this evening. He's going to be talking, I think, about who's with the feeling around British values and so on and that sort of thing, and how we deal with that in the classroom. Sort of recent issues around that. So that might be fun to have a look at, how we deal with that in the classroom, and what the best way forward is with. And I thank you so much, John, for coming on once again. Thank you to who has tuned in and watched along, and hopefully next time it'll be a bit better. I might have to go to another broadband provider.
Or maybe
All right. Good evening, everyone. Have a good night.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and